This episode is brought to you by Philips One by Sonicare. One-up your brushing with Philips One. It's a big step up from your manual toothbrush, with both rechargeable and battery-powered versions, so you can choose the one that best fits your life. Learn more at philips.com/one. That's philips.com/ONE.
Hey, everybody, this is Charles Hain for the No Film School podcast, the week of June 24th, 2021. I'm here with editor-in-chief of No Film School, George Edelman.
Hello.
And we are going to be talking about the British government clawing data away from the streamers. We are going to be talking about whether or not actors should be allowed to lie about their height, which is a more complicated issue than you would think. Got a little bit of a tease in tech news. And then we have an Ask No Film School inspired by a previous Ask No Film School. So it's an Ask No Film School inception about what makes a good script. All that this week on the No Film School podcast. All right, so our top story this week is the British government is going to make the streamers reveal, so far just to the British government, streaming data on how many people are watching their content. So a little bit of context on this story. First off, the streamers are notoriously very shy about releasing much data on, not any data, but just much data on how many people are watching and how long. So, Netflix will occasionally drop little bombs like, Bird Box is our most watched ever, but then they won't give a tremendous amount of context on how long people watched and all of those other things that are really relevant. All of the streamers are like this. They all consider it proprietary data. And coming from a world like YouTube, like if you've ever made a YouTube video, you're aware, down to the minute, how long everybody watched it, and how many people have watched it, and you check back an hour later and there's more hits. So we're used to having a lot of data, but a lot of this data is considered very opaque up at the top level. And while I'm confident that when David Fincher does a movie with Netflix, he gets access to all the data, not everybody does. I certainly know people who've done movies with big streamers and haven't gotten a lot of the back end data, and it's been very nebulous. And, some data comes out, but not the robust amount filmmakers are used to. And the BBC, who, the British government pays for a lot of content to be created in England. They have a very robust public broadcasting system with BBC and ITV and Channel 4 and Channel 5. There's a lot of content, Granada Television, that gets government money to make content in England. It's a much different model than our model. And a lot of that will then get co-produced with Netflix and released on Netflix. Like The Crown, which is treated as a Netflix show, is a BBC Netflix co-production. Peaky Blinders, I think, is the same. And there's a bunch of others. And apparently, even though you would think, I personally kind of assumed that they would have been in that top tier, we're getting all the data we could possibly want space. But apparently the British government is we are not getting all of the data that we would like. Please give us all of the data. And so far they are saying please, but they're making it very clear that we are a government. It's the British Parliament's Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Committee. Sport, sorry, because in England they just say sport. Digital, Culture, Media and Sport Committee. In America, that would be Sports Committee. Want the streamers to help track the reach of all of that content, because that's part of their decision making when they're producing this content, is how far it's going, who's it's engaging with. No one wants to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a show no one watches. We can all be confident that everyone watches The Crown because everybody seems to watch The Crown. But short of that, they want more data. And I think the implication in this current conversation is they're saying please, and soon they will go beyond please and say, if you don't give us the data, we will see you in court, as the British government has the right to do. So, in general, the streamers think it's going to be bad for their business model to reveal too much data. I have very complicated feelings on this. I understand the urge to be let's just focus on the quality of the content and not focus so much on the box office. And there's a pure art version of that I love. Nancy Meyer's whole thing is when did we start reporting box office news data in the mainstream news? Can we just talk about whether or not we like stuff and not whether or not it made money? And, I like that pure vision of it. I am also not 100% sure why this, like if the movie industry has always survived with box office numbers, where on Monday morning everybody knows how everything did, why does the streaming industry require no box office numbers to survive? Because the argument the streamers are making is this is proprietary data and it'll hurt our business if it's public. But like the movie industry's data has all been public forever.
Yeah, I guess my question is, how would it hurt? Like, what's the explanation, or is there one that you've heard? I don't understand why it would hurt. I guess what I've always thought of is that what I've always been aware of is that reporting these numbers helps to create a sense of demand or popularity or success. And so it's used, from my perspective, it seems it's used for marketing. It's like the number one movie of the weekend, which then you often like look at it and think like, oh, well, that doesn't tell me all that much about the movie, but that's a way of saying it's a hit, or go see it, or everyone's seeing it. Like, just it's marketing. It's the way it's always been done. What I question is, how does it hurt to report it? I guess if the numbers if they report that like nobody's watching their original programming, then even less people will watch it. Is that what they're worried about? Like, what are they afraid of?
I think there's a whole lot of factors here that are different for every company. So for instance, if you're Apple, you have all of the money on the earth. So you're in a different position than, say, Netflix. Netflix has a tremendous amount of revenue, but Netflix also has a tremendous amount of debt and venture capital and all sorts of other tied up in their process. And the bet that Netflix has been making is that they're going to grow fast enough to be able to cover the vig on that debt and make their investors and backers happy. So if you're Netflix, I can understand why Netflix is like, we don't publish data. I get that. Because Netflix is like, they don't want to, I'm sure
their investors and their,
Now, I'm sure their big investors get access to all of that data anyway, but there's a big difference. But there, you have to remember that investors are often willing to back things privately that publicly might look too risky, right? So like even if the investor has that data, once it comes out that like Netflix's viewership isn't as high as people assume, or one of the shows isn't a flop or whatever, that can affect public opinion. And those investors have their own shareholders and their own boards and their own. And so like it can make the investor feel pressured to pull something out or put more pressure. So like in Netflix's case, it makes total sense that they're like, no numbers. Or really what Netflix is saying is we don't want regular numbers. Because what the film industry has is regular numbers. Every Monday morning, everybody's used to pick apart what did what. We don't anymore because it got too depressing in the pandemic. But it used to be like part of Monday morning that we all checked the box office and it was in the normal news and like they talked about it on the nightly news and stuff. And Netflix doesn't want that. Netflix wants control over when their numbers come out, which like I think that I understand why they want that. And so they'll release things like Bird Box did these numbers, or they'll release things like this show did these numbers. But other than that, they don't want it to become an assumption. They don't want YouTube. They don't want every show having numbers underneath it where because there have been lawsuits in YouTube space when Google has like changed the metrics about how a number is counted. There were lawsuits and there's an assumption in YouTube that you're going to have all this data and it's going to be public. And at one point, YouTube had like a hiccup where your numbers would freeze and everybody got pissed. And Netflix doesn't want that. And like, I get it. Apple is in a different boat because Apple doesn't really have backers in the same way. I mean, there are large investors.
There's stockholders.
There's big stockholders. Yeah. And if stockholders got really angry about Apple TV or Apple TV Plus or whatever the streaming, if the numbers were terrible and a big enough group of investors got pissed about it, they could try and shut it down. So I think it's a different thing. I think in general, I like what the British government is doing here because I think as individual filmmakers, we would like access to more of that data. It's surprising to me that the British government isn't already able to get that data out of its streaming partners because you would think it would. Like you would assume that data would be like once you're big enough, that data has to be something that's available to you. And it's frankly surprising that the government has to fight for it, but hopefully them fighting for it will change some policies so that others who are, big enough because everything in every negotiation, it's all about precedent, right? So if you're negotiating to get access to that data and nobody else ever has, their lawyers are going to fight tooth and nail against it because nobody else has ever gotten that. As soon as the BBC and ITV in Granada are getting share in the numbers, then, when Fincher or someone else does a contract with a streamer, they're going to be like, look, I know people get these numbers. I would like these numbers too.
Right.
So it's going to be a good leverage. Also, they might realize, I think some of this is just habit. It's like we never had to do numbers before, so why would we do numbers now? And I think maybe once some of the numbers get more public and they realize that it's not such a big deal, they might get more flexible with the numbers. It's still a weird thing to be so locked up on, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think there's a perception of Netflix's dominance, that everybody has it, everybody's watching, that there's all these shows, and there's this importance of, going back to something I said a little earlier, the value of water cooler, like something just dropped, like, the weekend that Netflix puts out its new season of Stranger Things, there will be this energy to be like, go see it, and everybody talk about it. It'll be buzzy for like a weekend. There'll be memes, and you'll feel left out if you don't watch it, et cetera, et cetera. And that's sort of one of the things that drives that. That's one of the only ways you cut through the noise. We've talked about it before on this podcast, of all the available things. So I could see again why a streamer really doesn't want people to know that there are some very poorly watched programs, because that momentum works in the opposite direction as well. On the other hand, it's sort of like, it's quite a feat to have pulled off, to be able, like you said, dissecting box office numbers, and even though it's a horrible system, dissecting Nielsen ratings was always just the whole way the industry turned. And Nielsen ratings are a completely ridiculous methodology, but for so long, everything was built around those numbers, those audience shares, what was a hit and what wasn't, and what could keep going and sustain. So many conclusions drawn, and the fact that the streamers are the massive source of content. And right now, like even over the last few weekends, like I think Disney released their new Pixar movie pretty much only on the streaming platform. Godzilla, just talking about box office, Godzilla and King Kong finally crossed 100 million. That's crazy. And everything is simultaneously released right now. So, I don't know if that's going to change as pandemic stuff fades farther into the past, but there's certainly something crazy about the fact that the streamers are the main platform for content, and the studios that are creating that content. And so they have the means of production, they have the platform you view it, and they're not letting people know how many people are watching it. So there's no real indicator as to, we can't do the Monday morning quarterback of, they spent so much on John Carter of Mars, the series, and it completely tanked. Like nobody watched it. Like we don't get to spin that yarn, and that narrative doesn't exist. They only get to tell us Stranger Things broke every single streaming record. And we're kind of like, oh, wow, crazy. Everybody watches Stranger Things. Do you know what I mean? They completely control the ecosystem of the lifespan of the show, of the show or the movie. Number one watched movie means something in advertising speak, or always has. And they can announce that, but they don't have to really back it up. They don't have to be held accountable for the opposite being true. And it might be why they don't want to release in theaters as much, because we can say, latest Pixar movie, number one, like most watched thing over the weekend. It's like, okay, we'll take your word for it, I guess. I don't know. So maybe that'll cease to mean as much to people. Maybe it already has, but it's a strange. I'm also glad that the BBC is kind of going to hold their feet to the fire personally, because I think it would be good for the creatives and for the community to know what people are responding to or care about.
Yeah, I don't think all data needs to be out everywhere all the time, but I certainly think this data is relevant to the people who make projects. And I think that, they already they're constantly toying with, like you scan through Netflix and they're constantly being like popular near you, popular now. So they're
Right? Yeah,
dancing
it's like
around. They're
I looked at
trying.
that. That's a funny one. Sometimes I see that popular near you, and I just think about like what when I buy stuff on Amazon. I'm like, what are the other weirdo? What are like the people that my assumption about like the slice of life that lives near me? Like are they only buying organic field greens or something? Like I'm always curious. There's a little bit of curiosity. Like, why are people watching this? But then the truth is, like, I don't know how true that is. Like I don't know what they're serving me up. Like I don't. Our No Film School founder, Ryan Koo, made a movie with Netflix early on in Netflix's original Amateur thing. And Amateur's the name of the movie, early on in Netflix's financing original features. And he's often said to me, he's like, I wish I will never know. I have no idea. I know when people are talking about it, like I have Google alerts, but I would love to know how many people are watching this movie that like, like it's like he has no clue, right? That's crazy. That's a weird position to be in.
I know, especially if you've ever done anything on the internet where you get so much data so quickly. I mean, one of the, I've done a couple of YouTube videos where, we've gotten into the millions of hits, and you get like these wonderful breakdown graphs where it's like, oh wow, everybody stops watching at this point. And then you just see it like
Yes.
fall off a cliff, and you're like,
That's
I wonder.
that's such a great point. That's true about YouTube. I'm sorry to cut you off, but it makes me realize true about YouTube, even true about if you post like video on Facebook. And because I work in the internet primarily, so with No Film School, so we know everything about people reading it. Even on this podcast, I will look through the data on interviews I've done with people and think, okay, how quickly do people tune out? Like, what's the point at which audience retention drops? Like, what are we talking about at this point? Or what guests, and that can help us serve a better product. It's not even about anything nefarious or not nefarious, but anything like financially motivated. It's just simply how do we create something that our audiences are more motivated to listen to or like or enjoy. Like this is real-time feedback. And what you're pointing out could be an amazing tool to creatives to know, was my first act when everybody like the movie I wrote that was on streaming platforms and released digitally, et cetera, et cetera. I always had assumptions that like people didn't get past a certain point in Act One because it was because unfortunately it was one of our weaker sections, and I always thought that was a real error. But I don't have data. I only have my beliefs plus colloquial. Like I read the tea leaves. I wish I had data. Like, oh yeah, absolutely. Scene 4 is when because then I would say, okay, I've learned this important lesson. I have the data to back it up.
Or I am comfortable with the fact that I lost certain people here because the people who made it through this are going to stick through, like, which is also a legitimate, like, I don't think every artist is obligated to try and appeal to the widest swath of people. If you want to make something more niche, you can. But I still think it's fascinating to have the knowledge of when you lose them, right? Like if you're interested in a particular kind of body horror, having the data on when you get an audience drop because of a certain experience is useful. I mean, I tried to watch Manchester by the Sea. It was like, I love Kenneth Lonergan. The opening sequence of that movie is perfect. Like the screenwriting is amazing. Like it's like the acting is great. It's well directed. It's beautifully shot. Like everything is firing. And then spoiler alert, if you haven't seen this movie from 5 years ago, his kids die. And like my kid is young, and I got to the scene where his kids died, and I was like, nope, can't do it. Can't. I just can't. And like, no fault of anyone. Like, it's a movie about someone whose kids dies. Like, that's the thing. If I don't know why, but I was like, today I can't watch a movie about someone whose kids die. I just can't. And like,
that's good data for them to have, and also for them to know. Like, I mean, this is not just me. Like, I talked to Rennie Harlan on the podcast. We released it last week. And he told me a lesson he learned about test audiences when he made Cliffhanger. And I was amazed because it was like, you don't usually hear that many positive, like we did tests and I learned this, but he was like, it was a really valuable filmmaking lesson that I've learned and carried with me since. And I think that that's the kind of thing you could get if you had the data. I think it's really cool we stumbled upon this, that you mentioned it, because knowing that like these are creative lessons you could learn. Like if you're trying to grow as a filmmaker, you might say like, wow, if I do that kind of thing, I alienate a certain number of people. Okay, I'm okay with that. Or say, I have to change how I do it. Or, if interest level drops around here, what is it about this section? That is there a particular way that like suddenly female audiences in mass stop watching my movie? Like that would be, is there an episode of my series where it seems like I lost a certain age group? Like that's interesting to know. You don't have to change to try to please all of the people all the time. That's a great point. But testing is so valuable to the lifespan of the artist.
But the flip side of that is Manchester by the Sea, very early in Amazon's originals thing. Amazon is a very data-driven company. I guarantee you, even if Kenneth Lonergan has never seen the chart, I guarantee you someone at Amazon has seen a chart at how many people drop out when the kids pass away. Because I can't be the only one who is the parent of a young child and noped at that moment because they were just not able to, you think about your own kid dying and you're like, I can't.
What you're saying is the danger of the studio saying when they read stuff like, oh, we have all this data to back up that if a kid dies in the first act, we will lose X number of revenue. So no, we're not producing that movie.
Yeah, like what I don't want to see is an algorithm. Like Kenneth Lonergan having to send a script to Amazon Originals and an algorithm reading it and an algorithm suggesting, oh, you're going to lose a certain amount of your audience 30 minutes in because a child dies. Have you thought about maybe the child survives and gives the dad a hug? Like, I
mean, I hate to say it, but that's going to happen no matter what.
It probably is already happening.
Right. And that's going to happen even without the data. But so it's kind of like some of these things are just like someone's going to say to him, I guarantee that anytime something like that happened, you sit for every great movie moment, there's a pitch meeting or a meeting with an executive somewhere, not to knock executives, but they're going to be the butt of the joke here, where they're going to make the worst imaginable suggestion and you're going to have like this blank stare. And you're going to think, wow, you just don't even understand the point of what this story was, or you just want it to be something completely different, or you don't. Like it's just, and you're going to have to find a way to break through your own glazed over look and smile and be like, well, yeah, that's really interesting. Like it happens all the time. And like that, I think that the scary thing is them having the data to say like, look, it's not just my dumb opinion. We can't make X amount of dollars, so we can't produce it. But I still feel like that is kind of par out there. No matter what, you're gonna fight against that. You could, hey, maybe there's a way that if the artists also had the data, they could say, yeah, but look, Manchester by the Sea lost this many viewers. They just noped at the moment that happened, but it still retained this amount of many viewers, and it still did really well. So we know we can make a successful movie where this happens. Like I could see it going both ways, but I hear your point.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a part of me that's like, I don't want Kenneth Lonergan to have any of this data. I want him to just write whatever goddamn movie he feels like writing. Because I like his, but yeah, producers are different than writers. I mean,
yeah, I think you can learn a lot from data. You could take the wrong lessons, and it's probably valuable. This is something that comes up in athletics all the time because these guys have access to so much more data and video and the availability of video. Like think about it, 30 years ago, you wouldn't really be able to watch yourself as easily as now. You can watch, rewatch, dissect. And there's this debate like, does it make you better? Does it make you worse? Et cetera, et cetera. I think it's all about how you use the tools available to you. And I could certainly, like I said, with test screenings, some test screenings could really negatively impact filmmakers and their confidence in their own voice and their own material. And sometimes you have to say about audiences, fuck them, like they're wrong. I'm doing what I'm doing. Sometimes you have to say, you know what? I think there's something I could learn here. And what kind of person you are, an artist you're going to become, and how you grow is dictated by those little choices. And I think it's interesting. And I think I think that, back to the original point, I think the data should be available to those who seek it out.
I mean, I'm gonna wrap with this, which is I think that I agree that data should be available to those who seek it out, but I also think there should be a testing and certification requirement before you're allowed to access the data that you're actually capable of understanding data points. I mean, there's that famous
Yes.
example that goes around of that they use in business school all the time of you're a race car mechanic and your head gaskets keep blowing at these temperatures, and someone wants to race again at this temperature, and should you do it? And they show you a chart. And the real answer, which apparently no one ever gets right, is you're supposed to ask, can I see the temperatures on the days when the head gasket didn't blow? And then you see that chart, which is actually, it's all about the Challenger explosion. And the reason why they made the decision to fly on the Challenger explosion was they were only looking at other days where they'd had problems. Which were all colder, which were spread across a range of coldness. They didn't look on the fact that on warmer days, they never had problems. So obviously it's too cold. They should wait for a warmer day to launch. And it's one of those classic data science things where it's charts are only as useful as your ability to accurately engage in them. Right.
Yes.
So there needs to be some sophistication in how we engage with this data that I think should be encouraged in those using it.
Do you own camera equipment that you're not always using? At sharegrid.com, you can earn extra money renting out that camera gear to local filmmakers and photographers. ShareGrid vets every renter and gives them access to instant insurance to make sure your gear is always covered against damage or theft for 100% of its value. ShareGrid is the largest camera sharing community, over 100,000 creatives sharing over $1 billion worth of equipment. So no film school readers, ShareGrid has a special offer that's just for you. If you sign up today at sharegrid.com/NFS, you will get $100 worth of promotion credits for your listings. You can list all types of gear, whatever you have, from camera gear to lighting to audio to grip to props, even locations. Anything production related that you're not using can work to earn you money. So don't wait. Start putting your gear to work. Go to sharegrid.com/NFS.
This episode is brought to you by HP Instant Ink. No one is reading your mind, but HP Instant Ink knows when your printer is running low and sends you new cartridges, so you never have to think about ink. Save up to 50%. You'll pay less than $5 a month for ink and never run out again. Find out if your printer is eligible and enroll today at hpinstantink.com. Conditions apply. For details, visit hp.com/instantink Spotify.
Now, here is some data that we all understand, which is the next story we're going to talk about today, which is an internet controversy spreads from, I mostly know this. It's been a long time, but I mostly know this as a joke about internet dating. But James Gunn has brought it over to casting, which is James Gunn tweeted something. He has tweeted some controversial things in the past. I think he got fired from a movie from tweets and then got quietly rehired on the same movie, ignoring the tweets. Regardless, He tweeted, and I think he was maybe just trying to start controversy, which fine. That's what Twitter is for. Basically tweeted, I wish men would tell the truth about their height when casting. Casting a show is balancing lots of things. And 50% of the time, male actors exaggerate how tall they are on their resumes. And people had a lot of thoughts about this. Some people who were Anson Mount was it shouldn't fucking matter. And sort of had a feminist read that it's it's about male dominance and masculinity and stuff. I Googled Anson Mount. He is, according to the internet, 6'1". We do not know what that actually means. Because that could be a lie.
I'll tell a little backstory here. I saw James Gunn tweet this, and I thought, it's kind of aggressive, interesting. I love James Gunn. I don't just like him. I love him. I don't love all the movies, but I love his approach, his attitude, his style. I think if you're going to be a guy who he kind of came up with some kind of DIY-y horror stuff. I love the first Guardians of the Anyway, big fan. I follow him on Twitter. He made this comment, and I thought this is like an interestingly aggressive, like kind of poking the bear. Like, I mean, yes, actors lie about their height. People lie about their height. Everybody lies about these numbers, but there's something funny about it with actors. If you're in around the industry where like you'll see like Mel Gibson in real life and he looks like he's like 5'4". You're like, oh my God, they're a lot smaller. That's pretty much true across the boards. And even the ones you think that are tall, like end up being like quite a bit smaller than like Arnold Schwarzenegger, not that tall. I mean, I'm a tall guy. I think you're a tall guy too, Charles, right? We're around.
Yes.
But like you see Arnold Schwarzenegger in real life and you're like, yeah, he was really big once, like massive, but he's not like a giant. And actors in general, and they have big heads, and there's certain things that like photograph well. Anyway, there's a lot of standing on apple boxes, right? To even things out. And like, there's a lot of leading women or women in film who are taller than men. So it's a whole thing, right? And it's a joke that actors lie. So whatever you see listed, like knock like 2 to 3 inches off that. And a lot of them end up being 6 feet, which is probably an exaggeration. Anyway, it was funny to me that he tweeted it because it felt like a poking the bear with movie stars and male actors who tend to lie about their height, and it could be some insecurity or whatever. And Anson Mount's response. So when I saw that response, I was like, whoa, this guy is mad. Because he didn't just start there. He's like, why don't you share your measurements, James, or something like that, right? There was something in there. And so I said to our writing team at No Film School, I was like, I think we should write about this because this is kind of something. And it does uncover a little bit about the way that casting and height, like all this stuff, it's like a little bit of a peeling back of the curtain that is definitely a factor. It's definitely a thing. And people really responded to that article. So that's kind of one reason why I was sort of surprised at how interested people were in the topic. At the same time, I did think it was interesting. But yeah, think about it from the way you shoot a scene. Think about eye lines. Think about how you want to depict, like how you choose to depict a person in a frame. If they're tall, if they're short, if you're shooting above, what's in frame and what's out of frame and how hot. Like think about matching heights. Think about over the shoulders, right? Like so when you start to dissect the grammar of a scene as you shoot it, of course the star's height becomes important. So it makes sense that lying could be an issue because you're like, right, okay, we don't really know until we get them in the room testing with the opposite character. Right, Charles?
I agree. I mean, there's like, there's a famous, I think it's Film Sigmund got hired to shoot a movie that starred Holly Hunter and Sigourney Weaver. And Holly Hunter's like 5'4" and Sigourney Weaver's like 6'2". And when he got hired, he was like, this is wonderful. Just schedule more time. I just need more time. Like if you're going to give me 2 leads that are that far apart, it just slows me down. And apparently they gave him more time and it worked out great. My take on this is closer to I don't think we need to curse on the internet, but it's closer to the Anson Mount take than the James Gunn take, which is, I think that there are, the anecdote I was going to tell, it's been a long time, I've been married a long time, but like, when I was single, I went on a couple of internet dates and I listed my actual height, 6'1". And I remember a woman I was on a date with being like, wow, you're so tall. And I was like, but I said I was 6'1". And she's like, yeah, but I always assume every guy I go on a date with is lying by 2 or 3 inches. And then she said, you will almost never see anyone on a dating site list less than 6 feet. She said, like you just never saw it. Like she was like, oh, dudes who are 5'9" say they're 6 feet. And so I see 6'1", and I'm assuming you're going to be more like 5'9", 5'10". And I was like, oh, I mean, it never occurred to me to lie about my height. But like, I think it's indicative that there's a large cultural pressure on men to be taller. I think I see memes about this all the time about like the way different heights are responded to. So I understand that there is this like pressure for height. I didn't know Lee Pace was 6'5", that's so tall. But I think that what's interesting to me about this and Anson Mount's take is, look, obviously Tom Cruise keeps getting cast even though he is short because he is good at action movies and stuff. And it shouldn't actually, frankly, I agree with Anson Mount that it shouldn't be on headshots anymore. Because if you like a person, like bring them in, meet with them. If you like them enough, you will figure out how to make it work in the scene. And if they're right for the part, you make it work. And I think height is one of those pre-existing notions we always have of like in the internet dating world, how many women end up on those dates with those 5'8" guys and then end up falling in love, and it doesn't matter that he's not 6 feet tall. I mean, probably
Yes.
some.
Well,
and like, and probably some feel legitimately deceived that the person lied about their height. But like, it's a complicated thing, casting. And I think being open to the possibility that your narrow idea of what you're looking for is not actually what's right for the part. You should always be more open in casting if possible.
Yes, I agree with that. And I'll add, there are some other things. There's some subtext here. There's a lot of subtext brewing here. Anson Mount's response included he said, present us with your measurements when we walk through the door. We'll likely be underwhelmed. And I think that's the part that seemed to me like it touched a nerve. And here's what I mean. When you're an actor or an actor in this industry, there's this meat market thing where how you look, how you're measured, how you get judged so many ways. And there's prejudging, there's current judging, and there's this panel of James Gunn. If you're in a final stage, he's not going to sit there behind the table in the early days, but the casting people are just looking and making a lot of quick assessments about your looks. Do you look good enough? Are you ugly? Like harsh, painful stuff. It's crushing. And actors, people who pursue this, they need to develop a thick skin real fast, or else they're going to be miserable or just, it's not the right line of work. It's tough. And it's not fair, not just because it's dehumanizing, but also because it actually doesn't, as he says, it shouldn't and doesn't matter. Why? Because does it matter that Al Pacino and Robert De Niro are shorter? No. Are they still imposing on screen if they need to be? Yes. Is there a way to shoot anyone at any? I mean, yes, of course. And it doesn't mean you're not going to be good in a certain role. It doesn't mean any of that. But it is also a reality of this industry that they're going to say, we're looking for a tall guy. And that's going to be one of the ways they try to narrow the field, because the field is practically infinite. So, like it or not, actors are judged by these things, and it's painful and awful. And I think that what was coming out there with Anson Mount a little bit was like I am so fed up with that part of this. Like, I hate it. It's not fair. It's not reasonable, and it's stupid. And I think he's right in a lot of ways. But I also think it's the business he's in. Like, that's what being an actor is. Like, you're going to get judged that way. And it's not that he's wrong to speak out against it. It's just that it seems like there's probably so many years of walking into rooms. And in his case, oftentimes they're probably like, oh, he's way too big, right? Because it's always something is not good enough. Like, there's going to be like, well, the woman we cast is smaller and he's massive. Like, so he's going to look ridiculous. And so that's what he has to deal with. Everybody's going to have to deal with something. And I think where he's coming from is like, you, James Gunn, you're a director, you never have to be held to that. Like, they're going to judge you and hurt you in other ways, and you're going to need a thick skin, but you're never going to be judged by your size, your physical appearance. Like, they're not going to make decisions about your career and your livelihood based on that. Right. So I think that's kind of where this becomes like this. There's this brewing subtext and hostility between those who sit behind that casting table and those who have to stand up there and survive that. Did you remember, Charles, not that long ago, a video was released that it went viral. It was an actor who was doing an audition, and we might have even talked about it on the podcast. I don't know. But there was some directors, and they were not on mute, and they were talking about how the guy lived. They were like, oh, look at these people. Look at how this guy's like crappy apartment or whatever. And the guy who was the actor was like, you're not on mute, but yeah, I know my apartment kind of sucks. And then the person who's casting was like, it was just really awkward and horrible, but it was a window into the harshness of that, right? And I think that's what's really beneath the surface here.
Yeah, I mean, it is my two casting stories are always, I've auditioned 3 times. I booked all 3 jobs, so I'm never auditioning again because I'm not ruining my streak. But I remember one time I was auditioning, every time I ever auditioned for anything, I had a friend who was casting something who was like, would you just come in and audition for this? And then I ended up booking it and I'm staying out of it. But I remember driving across town to go into Discovery Networks to cast when I hosted a Discovery show. And like insecurities I hadn't thought about since I was like 12 started coming out of like, and I was like, I had a perfectly fine morning. I had a fun night the night before. Like I was like in a fine mood when I left my apartment. By the time I'd driven half an hour across LA, or an hour, let's be real, LA is big. By the time I got to Discovery Networks, like I was an adolescent child of like gibbering insecurities. And I remember dinner that night with an actress friend of mine, and I told her the story, and she was like, well, yeah, I mean, that's every audition, and I do that 5 times a week. And I was like, oh, that sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it's a brutal grind. And
Yeah.
the wherewithal to stick to that and find a way to feel good about yourself and confident despite no fault of your own. You could be too good looking, and it could be like, that could be the knock. I mean, it sounds crazy, but there are people who have to deal with that. Like that they're like, too pretty. That guy's too pretty. He's just like, and then that guy starts to get a complex because he's like, I'm not manly enough, or I'm not this. Like, I've known these people. Like it's crazy how much you can, yeah, I've done so many casting sessions. Like I've been casting so many times, and I've done them. I've auditioned for things before too. And it is unpleasant all the way around. It is just an unpleasant dynamic. And I have a lot of respect for the people who can handle it over and over again. And I also, on both sides,